Hey, folkies! How are you all going? I hope you're well. Today, I thought I would write a little lecture about writing an academic argument because this is something a lot of people struggle with, and these slides just might help you think through that process a little bit better. Because this idea of argument is very weird and strange, and people don't really get it, right? But there are ways where we can think through it in terms of practical steps so that it actually becomes part of a structure that you do, as opposed to this sort of out there thing that is a bit nebulous and weird and hard to understand. So I've used all sorts of different imagery and so forth in this lecture to try and get you to help you think about what academic argument is and how you do it. So you might be surprised to hear the word argument doesn't have a part of what is written there in your assignment to be an important part of your task, right? So even though it's not, come up with an academic argument about blah, it might be critically analyse blah, it might be compare and contrast blah, those types of things. But in fact, making an argument is absolutely central to that point. Expressing a point of view on a subject and supporting it with evidence is the aim of academic writing. And the word argument is not necessarily in your question, but it is definitely something that you are doing in that process. So an argument is usually a main idea, often called a claim or a thesis statement, backed up with evidence that supports the idea. In the majority of university assignments, you will need to make some sort of claim, use evidence to support that claim, and your ability to do this will separate your papers from those of students who see assignments as mere accumulations of facts and detail. Now, there's a whole argument handout that's online, and I've given you the lecture there. The link there to have a look at. It's really useful because it explains this stuff in a little bit more detail. So what an argument is not is also really important to think about because it helps to frame up the parameters of what an argument is. So it is not a statement of fact. So 26% of Australians prefer dark chocolate, right? It is not an assertion, which an example of is wearing a seatbelt reduces the risk of injury. It is not a prescriptive statement. Another example, the government should spend more money on healthcare. It's also not a conditional statement. If you drink too much, you will damage your brain. And it's also not a series of statements about the same thing. Smith talks about counterterrorism policing as blah. Taylor talks about counterterrorism policing as blah, whereas Dorcas talks about counterterrorism policing as blah. So that's a series of statements on the same thing, and that's describing something. It's not arguing about something. An argument is a group of statements of which one is a propositional claim that is supported by at least one of the other statements. So drinking water daily is good for your health as it cleans out your liver and reduces the level of toxins in your blood. So if you make that statement, you have to support that statement with evidence. And this is where you'll bring in your research literature and so forth. And there's a really nice little link to a handout at Flinders University that talks more about that type of stuff. So what do you need to do in an academic argument? You need a clear thesis claim that you're trying to make. Then you need your evidence, and if this is your sources that you've found, it could be journal articles, book chapters, government documents, legislative frameworks, a whole range of other different types of research. So your evidence is the sources that you've found, read, and critically analysed. Then you've got a counter-argument a lot of the time. That's a pros and cons, a compare and contrast, all of that type of stuff. You always need to acknowledge that counter-argument in some way, even if it's just one article that says, no, the rest of the material is bogus. It needs to be demonstrated there in some way. And you put that in to demonstrate you have a deep understanding of the evidence. And then, of course, you need a good structure. The structure for me is one of the most important things. You can write a great academic argument if you have thought very carefully and precisely about your structure. So, as you're going through, you need to make research notes about your evidence, all right? So each grouping of evidence comes in a theme that can become information in a particular paragraph or section in your essay, for instance. The theme for a group of evidence can be converted to the main point of that paragraph or section. The overall summary of the main points can be made into your thesis. And I typically use a concept map to organise my ideas, notes and evidence in this particular process. So if you're taking good research notes, that becomes your evidence for your argument when you're putting stuff together. Think about how your paragraphs are logically structured, the relationships between your main points, agreeing and disagreeing and so forth, how you can use transition words and phrases to signpost this for your reader. And there is acres of websites online that give you examples of academic language and phrasing. You can just Google it. Hundreds of them will come up for you. Really simple. Academic writing generally follows a bit of a diamond structure, and some people also talk about it as a triangle, where you start with the broad ideas and you funnel down to your specific. So your introduction introduces the topic, outlines the essay structure, states the thesis, and it gives that roadmap of things that you're going to do. Then the body of your essay is made up of a series of paragraphs, or if your work is a bit longer, a series of sections within your the body of your essay or your literature review or whatever it is. You've got to always make sure that you have good paragraph structure. Following the Peel paragraph process is really useful. I'm going to talk about that in a minute for you. So this is where you have the bulk of your argument in that section in the body. And then you go down to your conclusion where you're repeating the topic or the main thesis, summarising the essay structure, so what you've said, and then restating the thesis overall and giving your point for the future. So what for the future? Why is this important? Because counterterrorism policing has to be rethought of in terms of how we can work with the community instead of being reactive. Your body paragraphs are ordered to suit the type of task that you've been asked to do. So an analysis might be looking at causes of something. So one cause would be this, one cause would be that, one cause would be that. And you might organise that in terms of sections, or in fact, if it's really short essay, paragraphs. Comparison is looking at, examples of 3 different types of theories or models of something and comparing and contrasting those theories and models. Another example might be a discussion of what you need to do. So what are the different factors involved in terms of the effect of something? So that just gives you a few examples of how you might set this up. So plan out how many words you're going to write overall for each section. And do this in terms of the overall allowance for your assignment. So the intro and conclusion are usually 10% of the total number. And then you divide the remaining words more or less in terms of what you've got left to do, which is your body. And I've given you an example here of what they look like. Now, in terms of this example, it's really important to think, 400 words is 2 pages. Probably not a good idea to make that just 1 paragraph. So definitely a body section of your thing where you have a couple of paragraphs in it. Body paragraphs are like mini essays. You have a topic and concluding sections, and you introduce and summarise your point and so forth. And this is the way I structure it in terms of PEEL. PEEL stands for point, evidence, elaboration or explanation, and linking. So you start with your point or your topic sentence where you make your main point of the paragraph overall, and this links with your overall thesis of what you're discussing. Then you have your evidence. This is your research knowledge that you've found. You bring it all in and you synthesize it so it comes together. It's not just saying Smith talks about blah, Taylor talks about blah, Judy talks about blah, right? That's descriptive. You're not going to get good marks for that. You'll just pass. It's good that you've got your content there and it's on point. But what you actually need to do is look at the similarities and differences across those sources and synthesize them. So Smith and Taylor might say the same things. Brian and Judy might say the same things. So you talk about Smith and Taylor together in terms of their main arguments, and then you talk about Brian and Judy and how they differ from Smith and Taylor. Does that make sense? That's synthesis. You're drawing the ideas together instead of just listing them off separately. So this is what you do in your evidence section. And that can be research, literature, government documents, media, discussions of different things, legislative framework, all of those types of things might come into that section in your paragraph. Then you have explanations where you actually you need to talk about how what you've just talked about relates back to your evidence, right? And most importantly, to your main point. So this clearly demonstrates that counterterrorism policing needs to be rethought because it's not working, and we need to come up with new ways of thinking about counterterrorism policing. Then you have your linking sentence, which states the relevance of the material you've just talked about in relation to your overall point and to your next section or paragraph. And you sort of say things like, this clearly demonstrates that we need to move beyond a reactive approach to a more community approach for counterterrorism policing. Well, what's your next paragraph going to be about? It's going to be about community approaches to counterterrorism policing. Simple. So that's Peel. It's great. Use it. It will help you structure your argument every time. And typically, if you get really feedback on your work that says your work is descriptive rather than analytical, it's the L that's missing, the linking point that's missing in your discussion. Introductory and concluding paragraphs have a slightly different structure to body paragraphs. They're like the bookends of academic writing, and they do tend to mirror each other. Don't copy the same wording. You'll be plagiarizing yourself. But in your intro paragraph, you intro the topic, state the main thesis of what you're going to say, outline the structure of what you're going to talk about, define the scopes and limitations and so forth. Your concluding paragraph does basically the same thing. Paraphrases your thesis overall, summarizes the main points that you've talked about. Don't include any new material. That goes in your body, not your conclusion. So if you're introducing new ideas, chances are you've got it in the wrong place. And then you conclude strongly saying, what are we going to do for the future? The wording of your evidence often needs to be adapted to smoothly fit into your assignment. And the way that you do this can be three ways. You can do quotes. Keep those to a minimum. You must use quotation marks for anything under 40 words, so quotes under 40 words. If you have 40 words or more for your quote, then you indent and you don't use any quotation marks. Keep quoting to a minimum, 10% at the most. The more quotes you include, the less likely it is to be your work. And so we can't mark other people's quoted material as your work. So keep that in mind. Paraphrasing. This is where you've read the author's information and you've thought, that's good. You've put it aside and you've typed it in your own words. You still need to put in your author and your date, as you would be the quote, but the quote needs a page number. Paraphrase, not so much. Definitely author and date though. And then, most importantly, you're expressing it in your own words. Summarize means to mention briefly the author's ideas without really explaining it much further. So paraphrase elaborates a lot more. So these are the three ways that you can use the ideas of others. And then, of course, you need to cite them properly with your author and date and page number if you're quoting and so forth. And you have your list of references. Editing is very important. Please make sure that you look at the essay as a whole before you submit it. Think about your structure, your sources of information, the task requirements that you have, that you're not writing an analytical essay when you actually need a compare and contrast essay. And look at your overall style. Look for opinions. Look for all of these different types of things that get in the way of good writing. I talk about that in the good writing lecture. And then think about how you're going to proofread it. Look at the details, word choice, spelling, grammar, punctuation, all of those types of things in your work will help make your work better before you submit it. And that's all, folks. We are done. I hope that was helpful. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all soon. Bye for now.